In this video, we'll talk about how social workers think about the human body and the social work theories that help us to understand interactions between the interior body environment and external environments. So, at the end of this section, students should be able to use theory to summarize the intersection of the interior body and the exterior environment. You'll remember from Module 1 when we had an overview of the three main dimensions that social workers talk about when describing and explaining human behavior. Those three dimensions were the person, the environment, and time. Within the person dimension, there are subdimensions, and one of them is the biological dimension. The biological dimension refers to the physical body and what makes up the physical body. So this includes all of the cells, the neurotransmitters, the proteins, the organs, the muscles, and bones that make up the person and their physical body. The physical body or the biological dimension can affect human behavior, and it can be influenced by various dimensions of the environment. There's two main perspectives that we use as social workers to help us to understand the interaction between the body and the external environment. One of those is the systems perspective, and the other is the social constructionist perspective. The systems perspective broadly posits that there are many systems that are interrelated, and whenever there is a change in one system, it can create changes in the other systems that it is connected to. And as humans, our bodies themselves are a system. And within the interior body, there are systems like the cardiovascular system, the neurological system, the musculoskeletal system. They all work together to create the body. Then there's also lots of systems outside of the body in the external environment that can affect the, the person. When we think about boundaries in the system perspective and apply that to the biological person, we tend to think of the boundary as the skin of the body, that anything outside of the skin is the external environment, and anything within the skin is an internal environment. This is perhaps a simplistic view of the interior and external environment, because where does the interior body end and the external environment begin? Let's look at some examples. So, here are three examples for us to challenge this assumption that the boundary between the body and the external environment is the skin. My first example is the pacemaker. The pacemaker is a medical device that can be surgically implanted in a person's chest to help them regulate their heartbeat. Pretty cool. It has saved many lives and created longer lives for many people. But this pacemaker is the creation of the external environment and technological advances. Um, so this is within a person's skin. Is it considered their internal environment of their body, or is this part of the external environment? If it is part of the external environment, then our argument that the skin is the boundary is proven to be false, because this is inside the person beyond the skin. Let's look at another example. This little girl in this drawing has a cochlear implant. For some people who are born deaf can benefit from cochlear implants, and the way that they work is that the brain is actually physically stimulated and it's connected to a hearing aid, basically. And so most of how the cochlear implant works is on the outside of the person, not on the inside. So again, is this part of her interior or her exterior environment? There are not clear answers to that question. My last example is augmentative and assistive communication. For some people with developmental and learning differences, they have trouble with communicating in a traditional way and may use augmentative and assistive communication to communicate. AAC, as it's also called, usually is in the form of a communication board that you'll see in this drawing. This person is communicating with this child using the communication board. Nowadays, it is usually an iPad or some sort of tablet touchscreen where the person can click on different pictures or words to help them to vocalize um, their wants and needs and to communicate with other people. So, is this a part of his external or internal environment? And is this something that helps him and his internal environment? A lot of developmental and learning differences like autism and dyslexia, ADHD, we know now has some sort of physical component, genetic component. We have done brain studies that have shown some differences. So, this tool can help this person adapt to an external environment that might not be set up for this child to communicate in. Um, and so this is a tool that helps him. All right. The next perspective is the social constructionist perspective. And those three examples that I gave you on the last slide were three examples of what would be considered in our society a disabling condition, having heart disease, um, being born deaf, or having learning or developmental challenges. Those would, generally be called a disability. In the social work profession, we are moving towards using a strengths-based approach to disability. That's why I have dis in parentheses. Sometimes you'll see disability written this way in the literature. And sometimes you'll just not see dis at all and just hear us refer to ability and differences when talking about disability. Because, as you saw in those examples, there are ways that we can create accommodations that um, make it easier for people to get around in their environments based on their differences. And that is what the social constructionist perspective is rooted in, is that the limitations of having what's considered a disabling condition are explained both by the interior body as well as circumstances in the exterior environment that are political, social, cultural, technological, aesthetic, economic. So let's think of another example. Let's imagine that we know someone who has paralysis in their legs and they use a wheelchair to help them to get around. And that is a circumstance for them that they are able to access that piece of technology of the wheelchair to be able to help them to be mobile. If someone's economic environment was different, say they were not able to afford a wheelchair, then it would create more limitations for them. If they were perhaps bullied for using a wheelchair, they may be less likely to use a wheelchair and wanting to or avoid going in public, to avoid criticism from other people or being treated differently. So this approach can also be applied to developmental and learning differences, or what are also called developmental disabilities. Um, and within the disability community, a new movement has started that is focused on what's called neurodiversity, and it is rooted in the social constructionist perspective. On the next slide, you will be able to click on different videos and resources to learn more about the neurodiversity movement.